All right, so get ready, everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into a legal battle from the early 1900s Philippines. And let me tell you, this one is a real humdinger. We're talking about land ownership, colonial law, and one man's fight for what he believed was rightfully his.
It's a fascinating case, really gets to the heart of how legal systems interact and sometimes clash.
Exactly. And at the center of it all is Mateo Cariño. He petitions for ownership of this land, claiming he's been living on it for years. Seems pretty straightforward, right?
You'd think so.
But of course there's a twist. The Insular Government, which represented the U.S. back then, throws a wrench in the works.
They come out swinging, claiming the land is public property.
And just like that, things get a whole lot more interesting, because this isn't just about one man and his land.
Not at all. This case really exposes the shaky ground beneath people's feet when legal systems collide.
Okay, so let's break down Carino's side of the story first. His argument boils down to this. Look, I built a house here. I've been living on this land. I even filed this possessory information document.
He's basically going for the classic "I've always been here, it's mine" argument.
Right, I was here first. But you and I both know there's always more to this story. What else do those court documents tell us?
Well, for starters, they reveal some intriguing details about Carino's past with this particular piece of land. Turns out, before settling on the disputed property, he actually lived on neighboring land owned by others.
Really? So it's not like he was there his whole life?
Not quite. The court records mention him living on land belonging to a Donaldson Sim, for instance, and even earlier than that, on land owned by H. Phelps Whitmarsh.
So Carino was a bit of a nomad then, at least when it came to this particular plot of land.
It does make you question the whole continuous ownership argument, doesn't it?
And certainly throws a wrench into things.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing the Insular Government picked up on this little detail.
Absolutely. And they seized on it. Remember, we're talking about the Philippines in the early 1900s, a time of some pretty major legal transition.
Right, the U.S. had just taken over from Spain.
Exactly. And the Insular Government, inheriting the legal framework from the Spanish colonial government, had to operate under a very specific set of rules.
All right, let's get into those rules then. What was the Insular Government's legal basis for their claim?
Well, a key legal principle at play here is what's known as the presumption of state ownership. Basically, under Spanish rule, any land was considered to belong to the state unless there was very clear evidence to the contrary.
So the burden of proof rested entirely on Carino to prove he wasn't just squatting on government property.
Exactly. And to do that, he needed what's called a title of agreement.
Sounds important. What is that exactly?
Think of it like a deed for your house. It's the legal document that proves the land had been officially transferred from the Spanish government to a private owner.
And Carino didn't have one of those, did he?
Not a one. The court records clearly show that there's zero evidence of any such title for the land Carino was claiming.
Okay, so no title of agreement. But what about that possessory information document Carino kept presenting? Wasn't that supposed to be his proof?
On the surface, it seemed like it might hold some weight, but we have to remember, land ownership laws, even back then, were incredibly specific.
The devil's in the details, as they say.
Always. And in Carino's case, the law at the time stated that this document had to accurately reflect the size of the land being claimed. And unfortunately for Carino, his document didn't match the actual size of the land.
So even if he had a legitimate claim, this technicality tripped him up.
It certainly didn't help. And to add insult to injury, he also filed this document too late to benefit from a simplified ownership claim process that the Spanish government had allowed for a short period.
Oh no! Talk about bad timing.
Yeah, talk about being caught between a rock and a hard place.
No kidding. So his claim doesn't hold up under Spanish law, but then we've got a whole new set of rules coming in with the Americans.
Exactly, a whole new ball game.
Talk about adding fuel to the fire. We've got Spanish law, we've got American law. What happens next?
Well, as you can imagine, with the changing of the guard came a whole new set of laws regarding land ownership in the Philippines. And one of these new laws was Act Number 627.
Act Number 627.
Act Number 627. Okay, I'm taking notes.
This one's important because at first glance, it seemed like it could be Carino's saving grace.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, remember how we talked about that whole continuous use argument?
Yeah, like finders keepers, but for land.
That's a good way to put it. And this new law, Act Number 627, it actually allowed for claiming ownership through continuous use.
So Carino sees this new law and thinks, this is it, my lucky break.
You got it. After all, he'd been living on this land, using it, even building on it.
I mean, he's not wrong.
True, but And there's always a but, isn't there?
Especially in legal matters. What's the catch?
The catch is that Act number 627, it came with a very specific caveat,
Okay, I knew there had to be a catch somewhere. What was it?
a 16-hectare limit.
Meaning what exactly? Sorry, just want to make sure I understand this. So this new law, while promising on the surface, only applied to properties up to 16 hectares in size.
And I'm going to take a wild guess here and say that Cariño's land, the land he's been fighting for all this time, is a tad bigger than that.
You would be correct. He was trying to claim a whopping 40 hectares.
Oof. Talk about a swing and a miss. So close, and yet so far. So he's stuck. His claim doesn't work under Spanish law, and this new American law, while seemingly helpful, doesn't actually apply to him because of this size restriction. It's a real legal pickle.
Yeah.
What did the court make of all this?
It's a great question, right? Because you've got this fascinating gray area. Whose rules apply? Should Cariño have been judged based on those old Spanish laws, or did these new American laws give him a shot?
What a legal head-scratcher. I am seriously glued to my seat here. So tell me what happened. Which way did the court go with this one?
Well, when it came down to it, they ultimately sided with the Insular Government.
Oh, no. So it's all over for Cariño.
Not so fast.
What do you mean?
While they might have ruled against his claim for full ownership, it wasn't a complete and total loss for Cariño.
Oh, how come?
They did acknowledge that he did have some rights based on the fact that he had been in possession of the land, even though it didn't mean he fully owned it.
Interesting. So it's not a total loss.
Exactly. And it just goes to show how complicated and nuanced these issues of land ownership were, especially during this period of upheaval and transition. The court recognized that you can't just slap a new set of laws on top of an old system and expect it to be fair or even practical.
So what can we take away from Mateo Cariño's story then? Besides the fact that land disputes from over a century ago are surprisingly interesting. It really makes you think, doesn't it? About how laws, they might seem fixed, but really they exist within this much larger historical and social context.
Exactly. What seems straightforward on paper can get really messy, really fast, especially when you're dealing with different governments, legal systems changing, and people stuck in the middle of it all.
Like trying to build a house on a foundation that's moving underneath you.
That's a great way to put it. And for me, that's the real takeaway from Mateo Cariño's story. He highlights the challenges that people faced when things are changing so rapidly. Trying to prove you own your land when the rules about ownership are in flux, that's tough.
It really is. And it's easy to get lost in the legal details. But we have to remember, this is about real people, like Mateo Cariño.
Absolutely. Real people grappling with the consequences.
In this case, with this clash between Spanish and American law, I mean, it really gets you thinking about the bigger picture, doesn't it? How do you reconcile different legal systems, like in situations where one system is being placed on top of another?
It's a question without any easy answers, that's for sure.
No kidding. It really makes you think. Mateo Cariño's story might be over a century old, but it still resonates today.
Absolutely. It reminds us that law, history, and the human experience, they're all intertwined.
Well said. And on that note, that's a wrap on this deep dive into Mateo Cariño's fight for his land. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.